So most principals and superintendents and educational leaders believe that professional development will assist them with their personal lives, their human beingness. It doesn't work that way. Professional development works with you as the chair that you're sitting in as a professional, but it won't help you be a better human being. But working on yourself as a better human being will allow you to be a better human being and a better professional. Does that make sense?
In a world where the recruitment of Black educators dominates headlines, one question remains: where are the conversations with folks who are leaving education? Introducing The Exit Interview, a podcast dedicated to archiving the untold stories of Black folks who have departed from traditional education spaces. I'm Dr. Asia Lyons, and I'm embarking on a mission alongside my esteemed guests. Together, we shed light on the challenges, triumphs, and experiences of Black educators, aiming to inform and empower communities to invest in understanding the crucial issue of retention in education. Welcome to The Exit Interview, a podcast for Black educators. All right, folks, welcome back to The Exit Interview, a podcast for Black educators. It's me, Dr. Asia. So excited for season 5, our first episode. And I have a guest host today, Stacey Taylor Brandon. Stacey, what's going on?
Hey, Asia. I'm just excited to be here. I'm a big fan of Dr. Shawn Ginwright. I think I've given his book out and talked about him so much that I was excited that you reached out to me to be here. After being on the podcast twice, I'm excited to be back too.
Yeah, and I know that anyone who listens to the podcast has heard me talk about Stacey and all of her work. And so I just said I had to bring her on to come co-host today. Before we get into talking to Dr. Ginwright, I want to read his bio. Dr. Shawn Ginwright is a Jerome T. Murphy Professor of Practice at Harvard Graduate School of Education. His groundbreaking work on trauma, healing, and the empowerment of African American youth has earned him a reputation as an innovator, provocateur, and thought leader in the field of education. Dr. Ginwright's research has been instrumental in reshaping the discourse surrounding youth development. His introduction of the concept of healing-centered engagement in 2018 has revolutionized the field, providing an asset-based approach to addressing youth trauma and fostering resilience. His work has been cited in the New York Times, and he is a highly sought-after speaker on topics ranging from civic engagement and youth activism to the transformative power of healing. Dr. Genwright's contribution extends beyond his academic work. He is a seasoned nonprofit leader, serving as the co-founder and chief executive officer of Flourish Agenda, Inc., a research lab and consulting firm dedicated to unlocking the power of healing and empowering youth of color, as well as adult allies, to drive transformative change in their schools and communities. In recognition of his exceptional research and dedication to urban youth, he was awarded the prestigious Fulbright Senior Specialist Award from the U.S. State Department in 2011. A notable author, Dr. Ginwright has written numerous highly acclaimed books, including The Four Pivots, Reimagining Justice, Reimagining Ourselves, Hope and Healing in Urban Education, How Urban Activists and Teachers Are Reclaiming Matters of the Heart, Black Youth Rising, Activism and Radical Healing in Urban America, and Black in School, Afrocentric Reform, Urban Youth and the Promise of Hip Hop Culture. Additionally, because there's more, folks,
Yes.
he has co-edited the influential volume, Beyond Resistance, Youth Activism and Community Change, New Democratic Possibilities for Practice and Policy for America's Youth. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Ginwright.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here, Dr. Asia, Dr. Stacey. But more importantly, I'm a father of 2 beautiful children that are out in the world
Yes.
living their destiny. I'm a husband of 30 years to an extraordinary
Amen.
woman. I'm a community member. I'm an obedient servant. So I should put that stuff in there too. So all that other stuff is work, but the stuff that really matters, it needs to be in there. But thank you. It's good to be here.
Yes, so happy. So we're just going to jump in it. Go for it, Stacey.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Ginwright. And I wish I was a doctor. That may be in my path in the future, but thank you
You
anyway.
can call me Shawn. My
Okay.
mama can name me Dr. Ginwright. My mama named me Shawn. So
Right on.
It's hard. It's hard for me to call you Shawn. One of my friends calls you Brother Ginwright because she believes she knows you.
Oh,
Shawn,
okay. All right.
but she's
That'll work.
talking about your work. But Shawn, thank you for really emphasizing what really matters, your children, your wife of 30 years, all of those things, a community servant, all those things that are important in our community. But one of the things that we just wanted to start out with, the 4 pivots, phenomenal. Mine is here, it's weathered, it's highlighted, all of those things, but it really introduces powerful shifts in perspective for individual and collective transformation. The first one you really talk about is that shift or the pivot from lens to mirror, emphasizing self-reflection, which is so hard for many of us to take a look at ourselves first. Here at the Black Educator, at the Black Exit interview, Dr. Asia really talks about this idea of racial battle fatigue, and you talk about it in your book as racial weathering. So how can Black educators use self-reflection as a tool for healing from racial weathering and racial battle fatigue?
Yeah, great question. I really wrote the book for myself, right? Because I was involved with a lot of working in Black communities, organizing, and I was brought up in the school of thought that justice is what you do outside, right? It is what you do to other people, other institutions. Justice is what you accomplish from the actions you take in the world. And a series of things occurred in my own life where it made me do some deep reflection about my own fatigue, man. You know, I write about hope, but shit, sometimes I get hopeless, right? When I see
Yeah.
the
That's real.
conditions that young people have to navigate in our communities. So, you know, I really kind of wrote the book to say, like, if I had these tools, right, I think I'd be better off. And so, specifically to your question, I mean, I think racial battle fatigue is a real condition experienced every day. We all experience it. But I think what reflection does is it gives us a sanctuary of space to ask ourselves what's really important at this point, right? There's a way in which sometimes, you know, I think of this idea of racial battle fatigue is in the way that I was sort of trained is you grind through it, you battle, you fight,
Yeah.
you resist race, white supremacy at every front all the time, or else you just retreat, right? And I think that's important. I'm not suggesting that we should not confront white supremacy in our lives. But what self reflection allows us to do is ask ourselves, can I sit here and enjoy my daughter's soccer game right now?
Wow.
Can I sit here with my partner and watch this movie and enjoy it right now? Y'all know what I'm talking about? Like,
Yeah.
so,
Yes.
so
Right.
reflection gives us that space and gives us the permission, right, to take the spaces that we need to then get back into the battle, right? So there's a way in which I was trained is that you don't have retreat. And we know that from all kinds of battle metaphors that you have to actually have a space of retreat, a space of reflection. And so the mirror work allows us to, you know, kind of do that introspection. What am I most afraid of? What is my greatest aspiration? What do I hope for in my life? Most of the time, generally, our self reflection is self reflection that's not nurturing, right? So we might self
Oh,
reflect on what do I need to change about myself? What did I do wrong? Or damn, I should have said that when she said that racial thing to me. Y'all know what I'm
Yes.
talking about? You
Yes,
know,
exactly.
that, oh, I wish I would have said that. That's the kind of self reflection that's not sustainable, right? But
wow.
self reflection that's questions about what brings us meaning, what brings us joy, what brings us hope, what makes us laugh. Like that's part of this whole ecosystem of justice. And so this is a long answer to that question, but I
This
think
is perfect.
self-reflection gives us the permission and the sanctuary space we need to address this idea of racial weathering in hopes of transforming it, right? So yeah, I mean, I could go on, but I think that's a really good question. And hopefully folks can sort of make sense about what that looks like in their lives and in their work.
Yeah, that was powerful.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's interesting that you're saying that because I do think that what I think maybe some folks, and I'll speak for myself in the past, have been afraid of when I sat down and reflected and it wasn't tearing myself down was, and now what? And being afraid to answer that question of, you know what you need to do, right? You know what's the now what. And if I'm constantly moving, constantly joining some organization, signing up for a committee, I don't have to reflect and sit in and figure out the things that I need to do for my own health and wellness, right? And for the support of my family and community in this way that is going to bring me to a place of being like mentally well, right? And physically well in some cases. So I'm glad that you said that, because that is true. I've heard so many folks, especially we talk about to Black educators, Stacey and I, all the time, who are just saying like, I shoulda, we shoulda, coulda. And that's just never helpful. So I'm glad you said that. Thank you. And feel free to talk as much as you want, because the community needs to hear what you have to say. So please do not pause your wisdom on our behalf. So I think that many of the folks that I interview on this podcast, they're former Black educators who've left the field of teaching. And a lot of them have been pushed out for different reasons. And so my question, like many Black educators face systemic oppression that forces them to choose between sacrificing for their students, right? Like especially in the Denver metro area and the mountain states, we're the only one a lot of times. In Colorado, there's less than 1,000 Black teachers, right? And so we're asked to choose between sacrificing for our students and being the only one there for them and rest. And so I think the question I'm asking is, how does your work suggest we reconcile these pressures to ensure holistic wellness and community healing while also supporting our Black students or students, period?
Right?
You have to give me another hour to answer that question. I don't know.
We got some time. If you got time, we have time.
Wow. I got a lot of ways to answer that question. And I think I want to start with a gendered response to that question. Because Black women in particular hold the burden of the world, right? That the way in which Black women care, not only for their families, not only for the communities, not only for Black youth, but that burden of care and the way in which Black women, I think, are socialized, that it's a gender, it's not equal. Let me just say that. It ain't equal. And I could say that, my experience with my own family, and I could see it get played out. And it has consequences. And those consequences, the mental health consequences for that burden, particularly for Black women, are consequences of stress, of anxiety, of physical illness.
Yeah, say it.
Unfulfilled dreams, because everything else come before me. I don't even know what I want, because what I want is, y'all know what I'm talking about, right?
Yes, we do, of course.
So it's gendered. It's gendered. So that's the one thing I want to say. And I think particularly for Black women, I think it's important to, one, recognize that this sort of, and I don't want to call it an addiction to care, because it's kind of blaming, but I don't mean to do that. So I don't want to call it an addiction to care, but I want to make sure that folks understand that it's a gendered, it ain't equal for Black men or Black trans community, right? And so I think one is like, how do you, unfortunately, in my experience, Black women recognize it when it's too late.
Yeah.
When it's too late. And what I mean by that is too late is there's a panic attack, there's a hospital visit, I'm in bed till 2:00 in the day because I can't get up. And so it's too late, right? And so I can go over example over example over example. I'm not going to do that in this time, but I think because you understand the point. So I think one is, how do we recognize the pattern of care that's unhealthy for us, right? What does that look like? And then secondly, how do we actually strategically and intentionally, and even sometimes selfishly, integrate care for ourselves?
Yeah.
Right? Like an intentional space. I wish I had more time. Because my wife, I could bring her in when she could amen all this and be like, my wife's, I would just be real with y'all. Like my wife's friends right now, we've been married 30 years. We just celebrated our, and she's classic, this addiction to care. Everybody else, right?
Yeah.
Now she's like, I shouldn't say this on your podcast. She quotes Cardi B. She says, I don't cook, I don't clean.
Yes. Yeah.
But it is a way of her claiming her space. It's a way of her claiming her own autonomy for her own care, right? So I think secondly, it's like, how do we intentionally make create a micro diet of self-care for ourselves? What's a micro diet? It could be just 5 minutes. Sometimes we think we got to transform our lives and go to a Buddhist monastery. I need to get back into church, all of which is good. But what are the micro things we do every day? It's like a diet, right? You just do a little bit every day that ultimately ends up with something more profound. And so I think those two things, one, recognition, like what is going on? Do I have this overcaring tradition or this addiction to care that I feel that my own caring for others is actually caring for myself? That's one. And then two, if you realize that, then what are your micro diets of care? That do you take a
Mhm.
walk? Do you watch a movie? Whatever it is, that it should be something intentional and regular, because what that does is it disrupts, right? It disrupts our connection to the unconsciousness, the unconscious addiction to always caring and putting everyone before ourselves. So I hope I answered the question, but I
You
think
did.
those two things help to at least navigate that, because without it, we just continue to sort of grind away and then it becomes too late. I have so many students, and the reason I started off with a gendered response is because most of my students that I've had to support in this area are Black and Latino women.
I'm so glad you said that. As you were talking, I remember a woman called me. I don't know how she found my phone number. She called me 8 o'clock in the morning one day, and she said,
I
"I found
remember
your
this.
number." Yes, she said, "I
Mhm.
found your phone number on the internet. I listened to your podcast. I've been laying in the bed for 2 weeks, and I was supposed to be at work 2 weeks ago." She says, "I'm a third grade teacher, and I can't get out of bed. I can't go to work." And the school had just started 2 weeks before. And she's like, "What should I do? Should I start a business? Should I do something else?" And I'm like, "I think that your priorities are kind of mixed up right now." And I said, "I think that it's maybe time for you to leave education." And I will never forget this. And to this day, I still cannot believe she said this. She said, "But what about my 600 sick days?"
Mm.
And so I asked her, and first of all, I didn't know that you could accumulate that many over time like that. But then I said, "What about 600 well days?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what does it mean for you to be well?" Right? So we finished that conversation, and I went to call her later on to find out what she decided. I think I heard kind of around in community, she ended up on FMLA. But we get to that point where we have nothing left to give, and we're still talking about, what about a consulting firm? What
Yeah.
about starting a nonprofit? And
Yeah.
it's like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
We're still like that addiction to care. I'm so glad you said that. So thank you so much.
Yeah. A friend of mine, she says, we need to learn. It's such a profound, simple statement. We need to learn how to give from our excess, not our essence. Because if you give from your essence, that's depletable. But if you give from your excess, it calls into question, do I have any excess?
Oof.
Do you
Yeah.
have any
Yeah.
excess? So that's
Yeah.
what we
Why?
need to give from. Give from the extra, not from the essence. I mean, she talks about this all the time, but I think it's an important sort of metaphor to think about how we need to navigate some of these issues, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, Dr. Genwright, Shawn, first up, I just want to just give you a shout out for just the gendered response because many times we don't start there. And then just shout out to your wife.
For real.
We also celebrated 30 years this year, and we are rare Black love, Black couples making it, especially in this type of line of work too. So I know that she supports you, but also has her own work. So I don't cook, I don't clean. That's my mantra too. I didn't realize Cardi
I
B
was going
said
to
it.
say that. I was going to say it was your mantra.
It's my mantra too. I didn't
What's
know
up?
Cardi B said it, but I'm gonna bring
Ain't
that to
never
my
ran
husband.
alone.
Listen,
She,
the fact that
she
he
is
said
not
that,
alone. Yes.
I remember Stacey saying that when she retired. She's like, this is, or whatever. I think you had a birthday. You were like, "I'm not
Yeah.
doing this no more." And as soon as you said that, Shawn, I was thinking, oh, that's Stacey's motto too.
That's
Yes.
right.
Right.
That's right.
Right.
Well, it's a flag in the ground, right? It's not a rejection of anything. It's just like,
Mm-mm.
I'm making a decision about
Mhm.
me.
Right.
I'm
Right.
making a decision about me. And what's so beautiful about that is I see my daughter is looking at my wife and
Mm.
like, hey, like, oh, she's actually can go out with her friends. I could do that. She can see a different mama, right? She can see a
Yes.
freeness in her mama. She can see her
Mhm.
mama take a nap without guilt, right? And so it's beautiful to see my daughter be able to see that, right? And so
Mhm.
anyway,
You know, what you said is so important because I believe your wife and I grew up in the same age group where my mom didn't show that to me. What she showed to me was you get a job in an organization for 30 years and you work and you don't cry about it. and you just do it because that's what we do as Black women.
Mhm.
And that almost killed me. So
Mhm.
the fact that your wife is showing another way of being, to be healthy, to live past our 50, 60 years old, to not be obese, to not be, our health compromised with heart attacks and panic attacks and all those things, because what you listed at the beginning was my life in the
Yeah.
educational system. I started having those panic attacks. I did
Mm.
show up at the emergency room. My
Mm.
husband was with me saying, "You cannot go on like this. You're not dying." And they kept telling me it was stress. And I kept saying, "No, it's not. This is not stress. I can take this." But I was dying. So you talked a lot about the things that we can do for ourselves when we do that self reflection and we do the math, getting the air to ourselves. I love that, claiming an autonomy, care for ourselves. Well, what do you see for other leaders in educational spaces? How might they be helpful in applying your principles of the four pivots? Because
Yeah.
literally that book, when I was healing, changed my life. And that's why I'm such a fan.
Mm.
Because I had retired and I read that and I was like, I'm not crazy here. This is one
Mm.
of the first healing books for me. But how do you see the four pivots being used by leaders in spaces to advocate for systemic change in schools?
Well, I mean, I think first, read the book.
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely.
You both got to read the book. And it's actually really helpful to read it with someone else or a small group of people
Hmm.
to kind of like talk it through, because practicing some of the things are hard, right? Around mirror
Yeah.
work and cultivating transformative relationships. So they're not like you could just read the book and go do it, right? So I hope people read it and talk it, discuss it, try to practice it. So the second thing I think it's important for folks to take the four pivots diet, right? So what is it that
Mm.
individuals, like as a leader, just me, what can I do to begin to integrate some of these practices into my own life, personal life first, not professional. So I tried to not make that sort of my experience in leaders and principals and superintendents that I work with is that it's very rarely their professional lives that are and it's a challenge. It's really their personal. And then they
Mm.
bump up against each other and it's hard to detangle, right? So if you say, just do some professional development, the professional development doesn't make you a better human being, but working on your human beingness makes you a better professional.
Pause. Pause. Say it again. Say it again for those in the back. One more time, please.
So most principals and superintendents and educational leaders believe that professional development will assist them with their personal lives, their human beingness. It
Yes.
doesn't work that way. Professional development works with you as the chair that you're sitting in as a professional, but it won't help you be a better human being. But working on yourself as a better human being will allow you to be a better human being and a better professional. Does that make
Hmm.
sense?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so I start there. That's why I shared my story about my personal life, y'all. It's because I'm not talking about me as a professor and me as a writer. I'm talking about my family because that's
Mhm.
where it starts. So for leaders, educational leaders, what does this look like in your personal life? How do you work it, right? What is the level of development you have around how many transformative relationships do you have in your own life? How do you actually practice possibility thinking? So I just locate that personally first, right? Those practices. Then leaders can work on that personally. Then they could ask questions about how that translates into their work. Is it possible that we can actually have some of these practices in our staff meeting? Is it possible that we can actually create systems of support, right? Like you just said, Asia, most systems they're focused on when you get broken, then we can fix you. That's how our,
Yes.
when you get
Yes.
broken,
When you get
Mm-hmm.
broken.
then we'll give you some time to fix, sick leave, medical leave, FMLA. It means when stuff ain't right, then we can fix you to get back into the work. And that's a pathological broken system. So we need to have a more asset-based system of support. Like you just said, Asia, right? We need to have sabbaticals and wellness days and ways to support the workforce that's not just when you get broken. So leaders could think about how the four pivots can help support that. I've been talking with superintendents that are now implementing these sort of, there's this one actually in Texas, I couldn't believe it because Texas don't really hear about this stuff, but they're in Texas, and then they piloted these stipends, professional development stipends, for teachers to go and learn a wellness practice like
Oh, wow.
yoga or meditation or whatever it is. And they come back and they train their school on these practices and they get professional development units and they get a stipend to do that. In other words, they're trying to build those systems of well-being support, right? So I think individually first, then try to figure out what that looks like professionally in your own work setting. And then third, how do you actually create systems around the 4 pivots? How do you actually create language? One of the most important ways that we can use the 4 pivots in a systems way is evaluating the language that we have in our systems. So if we find ourselves like a common term like disadvantaged youth or whatever, the language or adjudicated youth, these are terms that we just take for granted, but they also signal a really deep perspective about how we view young people, right? So
Right.
there's different ways that I think is important, but I think individual first, as a personal, like what do those pivots mean to you? How might they be integrated into your leadership, right? And the folks that you work with? And then how do you actually build systems in your own organization and system and institution you're working with?
Yeah.
Easier said than done.
Brilliant. Yeah, it is. Just want to pop in to make a quick announcement. I will be recording the exit interview live at South by Southwest EDU on March 5th. That's right, I'm taking the show on the road. We're headed to Austin, Texas to record a live episode. And of course, I have a special guest. We'll have giveaways, time for questions from the audience. I am beyond excited and I hope to see you there. Again, if you plan to be at South by Southwest EDU, plan to come and see our episode recorded live. All right, back to the show. Peace. Stacey and I are taught in the same district. And I remember we were part of some DEI trainings and Stacey was actually a part of the PD team. And I remember this energy coming back from this professional development, thinking like, if we're going to do it, this is going to be amazing. And then folks are like, no, you're going to go back to your classroom and you're going to teach and you're going to be quiet. Right. And so it's like people, they're sent out by districts. The district paid for the folks to come. But it's like, how do you make sure that everyone's on board? And we know, like any other system, that education has people who come and go constantly.
Yeah.
So we have to constantly be doing or reevaluating and rethinking and having conversation and sending folks out. And it's needed. There's no but. And it's needed. And I know that, at least in the systems that I work within, there was always something changing. Like, nope, we changed our mind. We don't want to do reading anymore. It's focus is math. Oh, the CSAP test said we need to focus on. And the same was kind of done when we talk about equity, diversity, inclusion, belonging. It's like, oh, that's not working. It's not happening fast enough, as if human beings aren't a part of it. It's just, we forget the humanness, as you talked about. Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. I had another question I was going to ask, but I think you answered the question. And one of the questions I was going to ask was about like what educators can do to make change in their school district. But I don't want to ask that question because we need to be sitting down somewhere. We need to be resting. And you made that clear today. And we talk about that rest and that need for rest in the podcast all the time and in our daily work, Stacey and I. So I think I'll pivot to questions that I ask my other guests. And I have 2 questions. The first question is there a Black educator that you would like to shout out on our podcast?
Is there a Black educator?
Or educators?
Actually, LaShawn Chapman, who heads up, she's the CEO of the National Equity Project.
Yes.
Yeah, she's just an amazing sister. She's a friend of mine, but she's not just a friend. Like, I just watch how she moves in the world, and her dedication to supporting Black teachers and Black education is just, and her husband too is a friend of mine, Chris Chapman, who created an organization, Kingmakers, who works specifically with Black young men. It has a process of taking these young men into fellowships that really sustain their souls and really allows them to be brilliant. So anyway, I'll lump them together, Chris and LaShawn Chapman.
That's awesome.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, it is beautiful. I think Misha Mosley works with them, with the Black
I
Teacher
know
Project.
Misha. Yeah, I know Misha.
Yeah. Good people. Last question for you.
Oh, before you get to the last question, let
Go
me
ahead.
say this. because I want to just say thank you to the National Equity Project, because their work around attending to healing, along with your work and along with Karma, it really is changing the lives of Black educators.
Yes.
And really the focus on really changing that framework that we had to give and give and give, as you said, to essence and excess.
Mhm.
It resonates. But the work that you all are all doing to bring awareness to that self-care is not the buzzword, and it's not what the white folks are doing. It really is essential to us as a people to be able to be in spaces of supporting Black youth and other youth in our world today. I just want to say that because I know a lot of people that are really studying your work and looking at National Equity Project and just really just supporting the work that y'all are doing to make us healthier. We have to be healthy.
Yeah.
We have to embrace our human beingness.
Yeah.
I just want to say that before you,
Yeah.
Dr. Ginwright.
No, thank you, Stacey. And real quick, like this is not new for Black folk, right?
Right.
No, it's not.
We have in the transatlantic slave trade, and when we came and were brought here, we formed sanctuary spaces. They
We
turned
did.
into churches, they turned into whatever, but they're sanctuary spaces so that we can affirm our humanity and feel whole and loved, even in the context of deep, vicious white supremacy and racial oppression. We still did it. We
We did.
still did it.
Yeah.
And so it's not new. Like this thing called healing and self-care, it's not a new thing. It's just saying, let's not forget we are here because our ancestors did this. They did it. They got together on Saturdays mornings. They got together on Sundays. They lit the candle and did the thing, and they talked and they affirmed each other's humanity. And that was just enough to get through the next week, right? And so
Yeah.
it's
Amen
just,
to that.
it's not like a new thing, right? It is only saying that we are here as a result of the spiritual, deep practices of our ancestors. What do they look like today in this thing? Ain't no, you're not dealing with nothing new.
It's not
We are
new.
still here. So we just can't forget what got us here. That's all I'm trying to say.
Yeah, that's what you're reminding of us of, because when we get in these systems of oppression and these systems that promote and perpetuate white supremacy, we start to believe that we don't have what it takes to heal ourselves.
That's right.
That's right.
And we forget that we really do. And then we're so caught up in this productivity kind of wheel that we start to get gaslit. And
That's right.
so that's why I'm affirming what you all are doing, because it's bringing us back to our roots that we often forget, especially when we're in white dominated spaces that promote all of the things that we just are not. So thank you for reminding us
Yeah.
that we have
thank
it.
you.
We already have what it takes.
Yeah. I'll say one last thing. For you, what does it mean to be well?
I think of well-being and spiritually, physically, and emotionally. And I'm always sort of navigating those things. What it means for me to be well is to let go of the things that hold me down and strive for the things that lift me up.
Yeah.
I love that.
That's it?
That's it. That's a lot. But if you
It is,
if you knew me,
actually.
that'd be a lot. Let go of the things that hold me down, as people, places, and things, and strive for the things that lift me up. Physically, I exercise, I swim, I run. Those things lift me up. I meditate every morning. I love my children, my family, and my mama, even though she get on my nerves sometime. I'm going to
That's
see
real.
my mama and my family, right? And so those things feed me, right? And so I try to take an inventory literally at the end of a week. Like I take an inventory of what are the things that fed me, and then what are the things that drain me. If the last question of the things that drain me are too, oh, I gotta let some of them go. I'm sorry. I'm gonna just be really honest with y'all. I travel a lot, speak and blah, 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 and talk because, I love talking about this work, but getting on a plane and traveling to a place and I'm in a hotel. So now I'm like, you know what? I'm not traveling as much. I'm not gonna do it. It don't feed me. And I love spreading the word, but I don't like traveling that much to do it, right?
Yeah.
So I'm trying to make clear decisions, right? I love this because I'm at home, right? I'm still spreading the word, but they're little things, right? It's micro diets of decisions every day that we make about what feeds us and strains us. And so I try to keep that list of what feeds me. I keep that bucket full. I try to keep it full. Can't do it all the time. And I try to keep the other thing, that the bucket, that those things that drain me, I try to keep that one empty, but I can't keep it empty because there's just life, right? But I try to manage both of those.
Thank you. And I hope that our listeners heard that, right? There's so many pieces that Shawn discussed today, the micro diet, all these pieces that we can incorporate immediately to our lives, right? The journaling, the meditation, is so
what
good.
feeds you, what drains you.
Yes.
Brother, my friend got it right. Brother Ginwright.
Brother Ginwright.
Sister Stacey, Sister Asia.
Yes. Amen. This has been, I feel fed. I'm so excited to finally have had you on the podcast. I know this was months out in advance, and so happy that you had a chance to stop and chat with us. Just feeling super grateful. Stacey, you have any words?
No, I'm full. I was fed. So thank you. Anytime a Black man shouts out his wife, I'm all for it. So thank you to your wife.
Did you hear that, girl? Come on over here.
And your kid, too.
Yes,
So,
thank you, Dedra. Thanks to the kids.
All right.
All right. So this has concluded our episode of the Exit Interview, a podcast for Black educators. Thank you all for coming and listening to us. We hope that you listen again. Peace.
Thank y'all so much. Great.
Thank you.
If you've enjoyed this episode of The Exit Interview, a podcast for Black educators, I'm sure you'll love similar content in the Alive Podcast Network app. That's right, we've joined a podcast network. Plus, you can support this podcast and enjoy ad-free listening to nearly 100 other Black hosted podcasts. Head on over to the Alive Podcast Network today.